Leadership has been a hot topic within the field of business and organizational effectiveness for decades, and for obvious reasons. The phenomenon known as leadership is vital to an organization's success. Most of us can name various inspirational leaders throughout history within various fields and contexts, whether it's the creation of a new product like iPhone or the Tesla 3, winning world championships in sports, political party leaders and their influence on social systems and policies, or social justice leaders. One cannot refute the fact that leadership and the leaders at the center of these phenomena are crucial to the success of the whole. There have been many leadership theories offered up over the years. There seems to be no shortage on the literature that examines the impact and contribution that positive leaders have made throughout the world. Most discussions on leaders focus on the good of leadership, what successful leadership is and should look like, the characteristics and styles of these positive leaders, and so on. But what about the bad and toxic leaders? While every one of us has no doubt faced toxic leadership, it is seldom discussed. Why is that? Perhaps we simply do not want to think about the negative experiences in our lives. That's a normal response. Or perhaps we don't feel as if dwelling on toxic and bad leadership and the numerous examples of toxic leadership around the globe is worth our time. Why would we want to focus on the bad when we can spend our time focusing on the good? However, understanding the darker sides of our humanity can have transformational impacts on our personal leadership development. Understanding what not to do is just as important as understanding what to do. And though we may have some ideas of what it takes to be a good leader, we have unfortunately experienced negative leaders, as well as their toxic leadership traits. And these types of leaders attempt to create a culture in which they are the authority of the group, and the only purpose of their subordinates is to make their leader look good in front of their peers and superiors. We often wonder how these individuals were placed into leadership positions in the first place and how they are able to maintain that position for so long. Toxic leadership can destroy the morale of the subordinates in the team and may cause an overall decrease in productivity within the organization. In order to determine how toxic leaders receive their positions, I think we first need to understand what a toxic leadership is. What's a good definition? According to an article by Burns in 2017, toxic leadership is defined as, quote, a process in which leaders, by dint of their destructive behavior and or dysfunctional personal characteristics, inflict serious and enduring harm on their followers, their organization, and non-followers alike, end quote. Toxic leaders are usually driven by self-interest and will manipulate the success of others so that they can appear successful as well. I've been teaching courses on leadership for over a decade, and one of the assignments that I assign is on the student's experience with toxic leadership. The assignment requires the student to write a paper that addresses a toxic leader that they've experienced in their life, what the characteristics of that leader were, and what kind of environment that toxic leader created. So basically, what characteristics created what kind of environment which resulted in what? Characteristic X, for example, would lead to an environment of Y, which resulted in Z. Over the past decade, I've collected over 150 papers. My colleague and I ran these papers through in vivo, we themed them out, and we created a model that I will share in a later video. We used the Creswell's method for coding in qualitative studies, and most of the themes that emerge are grounded in the literature. But the findings provided 7 themes, and I'll go over them briefly now. The first one is micromanagement. This is where the leader wants to control everything. They're very oppressive. They have the my way or the highway mentality. They're very rigid, overbearing, coercive. This created an environment of low creativity and autonomy, low morale, and high turnover. The second theme was unethical. This is where the leader lacked a moral philosophy. They lacked any kind of integrity or personal code of ethics. There was a lot of lying, gossip, asking followers to complete tasks that the followers knew were unethical and that they knew the leader knew was unethical. This theme and this characteristic of toxic leadership created an environment of fear, mistrust, and stunted personal growth. Number 3 is a lack of empathy. This is where the leader is emotionless, low self-awareness, has no emotional intelligence, and had a lack of overall concern for the followers' safety. This resulted in an environment of fear and high turnover. The 4th one was narcissistic. This is where the leader is selfish, arrogant, blamed everyone but themselves when things went wrong. This created an environment of disengagement and low productivity. The 5th theme was unsupportive. This is where the leader didn't want to listen to anyone else's opinions or ideas. This created an environment of low creativity, low autonomy. The 6th one is authoritative. This is where the leader wanted to control everything through fear and intimidation, depending completely on their position of power. There was a lot of yelling, demeaning. They demanded respect. They were abusive and retaliatory. This created an environment of poor morale, high stress, anxiety, depression, fear, high turnover, a culture where everyone was out for themselves, low growth, low motivation, and, interestingly enough, an increase in litigation against the organization. The 7th and final theme was poor communication. This is where the leader is just bad at communicating the vision, the goals, or the mission of the organization or the team. They had a very severe inability to effectively communicate expectations, which created an environment of uncertainty and disengagement. Through this research and through this look at student experiences of toxic leaders, other interesting findings emerged. We weren't looking for these, but we started seeing some patterns. One of the questions many students answered on their own, even though it wasn't asked in the assignment prompt, was, why did I stay? Why did I put up with all of this? Which prompted the question, why do employees stay with toxic leaders? Well, one of the findings was there are too many barriers to escape. The followers needed the money or the benefits for their family. They couldn't find another job that paid as much or had as good of benefits in healthcare, retirement plan, etc. The second reason was the individuals were stuck in a contract, whether it was the military or the sports, or a sports franchise or a sports team. The followers were unable to leave the situation or the toxic leader due to their contractual obligations. Number 3 was Stockholm Syndrome, and this is similar to Finkelstein's 2016 book Super Bosses, where he talks about the quote-unquote glorious bastards. This is where the follower is so enamored with the leader in almost a cult-like way that they are willing to put up with any abuse that the leader puts on them. And lastly, and this one was really sad and heartbreaking for me personally, the individuals, the followers, didn't leave because it was their parents and they couldn't leave. The toxic leader they were reflecting on was their mom or their dad. Abusive, both physically and verbally, and they didn't realize the toxicity until they were older. Finally, I want to talk about transference, and this is where the leader's toxicity transfers to the followers. Toxicity is contagious. For example, individuals that were interviewed would reflect on their leader and how the leader didn't used to be toxic until there was a new leader above them that came in and was toxic, and it spread down the line. That is to say, their immediate supervisor wasn't toxic until their immediate supervisor's boss became toxic, and it had a snowball effect downhill. Again, it's important to understand these toxic leadership traits and how toxicity can impact an organization? How can you use these characteristics in your own life and in your own organizational experiences? If you see a symptom of the environment that is created, for example, if you see lying, gossip, if you see environments of fear and mistrust, stunted personal growth, you may want to look at whether or not the supervisor of that team is unethical. Or if you have employees that are complaining about an oppressive work culture, a rigid and overbearing or coercive leader in an environment where there's low creativity, low morale, and high turnover, you might want to look at your leader as being a micromanager. These things can be a symptom for the underlying cause of a toxicity, and that is where we need to look as leaders to resolve some organizational issues.